Hey guys, what's up? Welcome to a new episode of Brain Dump. This is my friend. He goes by the name of Dislocated, and he's a music producer. And I don't know him too well, but we met in LA probably a few months ago. So everyone, welcome Dislocated. How are you doing today?
Hey, thanks, Ron. Thanks for having me.
Yeah.
Glad to be here.
So I listened to your new track. It was pretty cool. I know it's like very like, do you do mostly like high tempo music? Is that like what you,
Man, yeah, it's been a mix. I think a lot of my stuff has, at least recently, has been a little bit more high tempo. So kind of, at least 125, 128 beats per minute, even like 150. Um, it's actually been kind of a journey, man. So so to kind of introduce myself, actually, so I produce electronic music. I'm based here in the Bay Area, and I've been doing this for a few years. I put out my first ever track in 2018, which was kind of a piano house type of track, and I got really into it over the course of the pandemic, getting even more and more serious about it. um, I have a day job. I work here in the Bay Area, and on the side, I had been doing music, and for the longest time, I had been creating all these demos. I had been creating all these loops and stuff, and I'd have all these friends of mine come over. I'd show them these little clips, and everyone would be like, "Oh yeah, that's cool. You should get it out." But I'd never finished a full track until a few years ago.
Mhm.
And that first ever track took me like 6 months or 5 months to just go through that whole process, like, you know, um, arranging it, mixing it, getting it mastered, and all that stuff. But since then, I've gotten a lot better, a lot faster. I've been working on my piano skills, trying
Nice.
to get better at not just the music theory and the chord aspect of it, but also being able to play, like being able to solo and stuff. And so, more recently, over the pandemic, I started writing a whole bunch of different tracks. And a lot of these were actually inspired by my time in lockdown, where I spent a lot of time just isolated. There was you know there was a lot of different times where you were sheltering in place and things like that. And so a lot of these tracks are really about this sense of escape, the sense of freedom, if you will. And so that last track that I put out, Luminosity, that you're mentioning, I wrote it at that time, and I wanted this feeling of escape, and I was wondering what it would be like to kind of, almost ride a roller coaster out to space or something like that. And so that's kind of the vibe I wanted to give. And so that's why you've got this sort of very energetic tempo on it. There's a lot of different sounds that make it feel like you're in space, or you're kind of
Mhm.
going through a portal or something like that. Um, and yeah, so that's where it comes from. Um, More recently, I would say, yeah, like my tracks have been high tempo a little bit, but not always the case.
Mhm. So what was your first start into, I guess, music production? Like, how did you become interested in it?
So with music production, I grew up in Qatar in the Middle East, in a small town called Mesaid. And growing up, there was not a lot of electronic music there or anything. A lot of it was pop, top 40 type stuff, you would say,
Mhm.
and a lot of Arabic music and stuff. And on the weekends, I used to tune in to this radio station in Dubai, like on Thursday. And this radio station, there was a guy called DJ KV who used to play like a trance mix of sorts. And I didn't really know what this kind of music was. And in that DJ mix, I just thought it was like a 2-hour track because I don't know what was going on. And slowly I got into that kind of music just by trying to find it on the internet, on forums, downloading and this and that, trading it with friends. And I got into DJing eventually over time. So I started DJing in college. I started DJing, a little bit post college and stuff. And in 2012, I moved to Seattle. And once I moved there, I had a day job there, and it was pretty intense when I first got there. And so, during the week, I would be working really intensely, and it would be really hard for me to, do any kind of DJing or anything like that during the weekdays. And then on the weekends, when I would wake up on a Saturday or Sunday, I'd be like, oh, I need some kind of a creative outlet. And, you could DJ, I could put out some mixtapes, I could try doing those things. But I needed more flexibility in how I could express that creativity. So at the time, there was a school called Dubspot. There was this online school. They don't exist anymore, I don't think, that was offering this Ableton program. Like it was like a 5 or 6 month course that you would, watch some videos every week, put in some assignments. And I took that course around 2013 or 14, something like that. And that's how I slowly started getting into it. And so over the course of those 2 or 3 years, I actually sold off all of my DJ equipment and instead started buying a lot more of the producing equipment instead. And since then, it slowly grew from there. It was like, okay, I know how to put some loops together. I can make some basic sounds on Ableton, but I don't know how to express what I'm trying to express. So maybe I should learn some music theory. Maybe I should learn some piano.
Yeah.
So yeah, it went, kind of from there.
That's awesome. Cool.
What about yourself, actually? How did you get into it?
I guess I always just grew up just listening to, a lot of different types of music. Like I was really into like hip hop and EDM, and I was really into like, indie rock and stuff too as a kid. And then I just really wanted to, I guess just the idea of making music never really went away. So I was like, I should try it. And I had a guitar when I was like in high school, and I had a bass. So I would like just mess around on those a lot. Like I would try to just
Mm-hmm.
learn songs that I liked. And then, I sort of started to hear about DAWs and like, look into those. And so I ended up getting Logic. And when I was like in college, and then it was really hard at first. Like it was really, confusing for me at first, but I sort of just stuck with it. And like over time, I just sort of like, through, hanging out with people who were also making music and also just doing a lot of like online research and like watching YouTube videos, I sort of like figured it out. And then, after that, I was like, okay, I know like the program, but I need to learn how to like, play music and stuff like that. So I sort of started to do like, I would do open mics just to like perform. And I started taking like music theory classes and, more stuff like that, and like practicing piano, which helped. And I was like, okay, I want to like make my own music. And, I started to like, sing on my own tracks and sort of like learn how to make like a full song, which took me a really long time to figure out how to do that. Like sort of like you were saying, like it took me, because I would just make these little like loops and random stuff that I would do that sounded cool, but it was never like I made, a full song from like start to finish. And
Yeah.
it was probably just about a few years ago where I actually like got comfortable with doing like full songs for myself. So there's like a whole journey to me, doing like music production. And then I released like an album last year and a single. And I've just sort of trying to, improve my skills right now and like really make something that I really like and like, would want to listen to myself, like just for fun. That's like sort of my goal. And so I've just sort of been learning like more about like vocal mixing these days and like,
Mhm.
arrangement and like, automating things and like different effects and just sort of making things sound more full, like just as music in general. So that's sort of like where I am right now.
Gotcha, gotcha. Yeah, that's super dope. Like vocals is an area that I have never tried or experimented with,
Mhm.
and you know, I'm also curious, um, on the vocal front, especially like where some of your inspiration comes from. Um,
Yeah, I would say it really comes from like, I think almost like hip hop first and foremost,
mhm.
because that's sort of like the genre that I just have the most hours like listening to. And like Kid Cudi and like Kanye West and
Yeah,
stuff like that was really, the baseline of me really getting into music like passionately. So I feel like that has sort of like informed, everything I do, like almost for the rest of my life, I think, just because I've listened to so much like, hip hop and stuff like that and,
mhm.
rap music. It's just I feel like my baseline, even though I do, now I listen to like all different types of music and, there's different, factors that like go into the music I make now from like all different genres. But I feel like vocally, that's more of where I am. Like mostly, rapping and trying to do that and, singing and stuff like that is sort of like I guess it's sort of secondary to me, but I really sort of like both, like rapping and singing.
Mm,
It's mostly from, that early, hip hop that I used to listen to.
gotcha, gotcha.
My main influence, I think.
Yeah, yeah. You know, as I'm also curious from your perspective with the vocals. Do you see vocals as kind of an instrument as part of the rest, along with the rest of the other items? And do you kind of build your tracks that way, or do you kind of look at, hey, the vocal is the main star of the show, and everything else around it is really just supporting this vocal?
That's really interesting. I think I actually look at it as more of like an instrument, um, just because I always do the vocal. Usually I'll do it last. Like usually I'll have, the whole production and I'll be like, okay,
Uh-huh.
I like this production. And then I'll do the vocal over it. So it's sort of just it's not an afterthought because I always produce a track with the end goal of putting my vocals on it,
Hmm.
but I wait until the track is solid and then I start. So
Gotcha, gotcha. Yeah, hip hop as a genre, I've gotten into it more over the last, I would say, like 10 years or so. Growing up, I didn't really know much of hip hop. It was mostly like pop music that was popular when I was growing up.
yeah.
So I'm almost kind of going through the journey in the last 10 years where, not just listening to like Kanye, for example, around that 2008, 2009 time, but also going back and discovering, you know, all of the hip hop from like the late 80s and early 90s, like Eric B and Rakim and, Camp Lo and all of those guys.
Mhm.
So I've been enjoying it a lot. I've been listening to a lot of hip hop as well, lately.
Cool. Yeah, I feel like yeah, it's interesting how music taste like changes over time, I think. But there's also like stuff that we always go back to. Like for me right now, I've been listening to like a lot of like indie, like newer like indie artists, and then like EDM, like has been, I guess, really influential in me starting production. Because I feel like when I started to do music production,
Hmm.
it was sort of because I was listening to EDM music,
I
and
see.
that sort of made me want to learn like Logic and stuff.
When did you get into the electronic side of things, and how did that happen?
I would say I think it was maybe around like 2014 is when
Hmm.
I started to listen to like, I guess, like Diplo and like Calvin Harris,
Yeah.
stuff like that, and I was like, oh, okay, this, and like Martin Garrix. I was like, okay, this is like really cool. Like just how they would make tracks like hits that, sometimes wouldn't even have like a vocal in it, or it would just be, so driven by like the beat. Um yeah, so I don't know, I just thought that was cool, and I was like, oh, I like the energy of it, and I wanted to make I wanted to make it. So yeah.
Yeah, around that time especially, there was a lot of it was like a really huge sound, like the stadium sound, if you will.
Exactly. Yeah.
And a few years before that, I don't know if you followed the whole blog house era, where
I
there was a
don't
lot
think
of,
so. I know like a little bit of it, but I didn't like, I wasn't really like into it that much. But yeah.
yeah, there was this period of time, I think, I want to say around 2009 to maybe 2011 or something.
Hmm.
This was around the time when SoundCloud just started popping,
Oh yeah.
because it used to be a pain to like, for blogs and others to post music on their sites because they had to host it and upload it and do all that. But SoundCloud started to make it really easy for people to upload music and just embed those players in their website. So there was this whole explosion of blogs just posting, all this sort of indie electronic music, a lot of which was inspired by like the 80s synthwave and stuff. So I remember that time. It was just before the whole EDM kind of, you know,
Hmm.
explosion, if you will.
Yeah, that's cool. And I bet like it was that like sort of like when you were DJing, or was that like,
Yeah.
that was like in the middle of that?
Yeah, that was around the time I was DJing, or just after that. But I was still DJing. I remember at that time, and yeah, you would have so many like mashups and bootlegs, and any pop song had some kind of electro remix. Like,
Yeah.
um, yeah, that was a fun time. I remember that.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, it's interesting. I mean, the journey of music. I got into it because of trance music and later house music. And then when I started to try to make it, I was into the trance music scene around, I got into it maybe in the early 2000s, like 2001, 2000, something like that.
Hmm.
And I really dug it for a few years before, the whole Bloghouse era started. And when I started to make music, I started to kind of trace the roots of this music, like where does house music come from, where does trance music come from, and all of that. And I've gone through this journey, and like now with the with my own journey with the piano side especially, um with that I've been going back, like learning like the blues, learning like about gospel and jazz, and now being able to slowly start to see those influences, like where some of these chords come from in house music from the 80s,
Yeah.
like from disco, from funk. So I'm actually not just enjoying the aspect of producing, but also kind of almost researching or learning the history of where a lot of this is coming from and what was going on at the time. uh, and in a way, kind of paying homage to those folks who made this.
Yeah, that's really cool. Yeah, 80s music is definitely, I feel like it definitely almost stands out for people now as like a decade of like nostalgia with music
Mm,
more than like almost other times for some reason. Like so much happened in the 80s with like synths and everything.
yeah.
It's just such a unique sound, you know. And I feel like that's what the 80s is known for. And then when you get into the 90s, it was more, you know, about like almost like hip hop and like R&B type stuff, like 90s and early 2000s, you know. It's interesting like how we think of those decades now.
Yeah, is there anything from the 80s that stands out to you, like any artists or a particular sound?
Yeah, like for me I always like Phil Collins, like The Police, like Tears for Fears, a lot of that like electro rock music,
Yeah.
like really cool sounding, and it's just like you just it's like the only place to like get that feel is like you have to listen to those bands because they're just so unique now. It's like you just feel like you're almost like there, you know. I don't know. It's cool, and it's like interesting for me because like I was born in like 1992. I
Mm,
was like I didn't even like grow up around that stuff. Like that was after I mean that happened like before I was born. So it's really interesting like going back and like discovering stuff like in like 20 2020 that happened in like 1980, like before you were born. And like it's just it's cool to just discover that like for yourself. Like you might hear it on the radio while you're shopping, or you might hear it like in a public place or something, but it doesn't really do anything to you. As I mean, maybe you'll get introduced to it like that, because I feel like that's how most people get introduced to it. But you have to like really dive into like the albums by yourself and like the records by yourself, and then you get more of like like in your own context. And it's really cool just to listen to music like that, like in your own context, outside of just hearing it, in public. Because you can actually like, you're like, I'm choosing to listen to this. Like,
yeah, you go on this whole journey of sort of crate digging, if you will, like
mhm.
um, where you listen to this one album and you see maybe there's a song that features somebody and you really like that song, and so now you check out the work by the person it featured, and then you see, oh, so and so played guitar on this or did the drums on this or whatnot, and it's just like an endless journey going through all of that. um, I will say about Phil Collins, like, so some of those drum sounds, I mean, those are absolutely fantastic. And I don't know if you watched this movie Risky Business from the 80s.
I've heard of it, but I haven't watched it.
Yeah, it's this movie. It features Tom Cruise, one of his formative movies, I think. And that song "In the Air Tonight" is on the soundtrack.
Mhm.
And that soundtrack is awesome because it's also got one of my favorite songs ever. It's by Tangerine Dream. It's called "Love on a Real Train,"
Okay.
and it's this sort of synth, um, like, yeah, it's almost like the synth progressive type of tune. Um, but that's the kind of sound when I think of the 80s, that's what comes to me. um yeah, very trippy sort of synth sounds.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely.
um have you been into the 70s much?
Um, Not too much. My dad is like really into that, like 70s music. Um, he likes a lot of like soul music
Oh yeah.
and stuff like that. That was like his, because I think that was like when he was, growing up. So that was like his music, and like I heard a lot of that from him, but I haven't gotten too into it.
Yeah, dude, 70s, I love the 70s. I mean, I've been listening to a lot of like Pink Floyd and Earth, Wind and Fire, and
Yeah.
a lot of rock and roll from that time. um and the thing that I've been looking to from the music of that era is actually gaining inspiration on arrangements,
Hmm.
because that was a time when, like, I don't know what it is about the music. It just kind of felt free in some sense. Um, like
Yeah.
the song structures were a lot free flowing. You might have tracks that are 2 minutes, you might have tracks that are 10 minutes, 15 minutes. um, and I've been looking forward to that because through my own musical journey, when I first started making tracks, I was making tracks for like specifically for DJs, right? And I still do. Um, and especially with house music or techno or any of these kind of four on the floor styles, there's a certain structure to it. You've got to have some amount of um, stripped down drums, if you will, at the beginning, so a DJ can mix in and out of it. Similarly, towards the end, and if you listen to a lot of the top songs on the Beatport top 10, uh, you'll find there's a lot of similarities in that structure because it works in a club setting,
Mhm.
you know, and people can latch onto that structure. They kind of recognize it. So when you play it in a club, a DJ mixes it, they know what's going on. They know when the drop's about to happen and all of that kind of stuff. Uh, and that's the kind of music I was making right before the pandemic, or especially in that framework. And since the pandemic, I didn't go to any clubs. I used to go clubbing a lot, but a lot of the time I was just sitting at home listening to stuff. And so I still wanted to make electronic music, but having that kind of 30 seconds intro with a bunch of stuff going on, or maybe even for a minute, it just didn't feel suitable for the environment I was listening in.
Yeah.
And so I've been trying to mess around, trying to spin up some of those arrangements, trying to flip some of them up so that even if it is electronic music, it's, maybe it's not exactly the structure you'd expect. Maybe it's a little, there's something unexpected in that arrangement, in that framework. And so I've been looking to the 70s, for a lot of that. And I've also been looking to a lot of electronic artists like the Chemical Brothers and stuff, whose arrangements were very, very different track to track.
Mhm.
So that's something that I'm, continuing to experiment with. And the next track that I'm going to put out is going to have a little bit of a different intro. Um, in one of my tracks that I put out, I Want You Now, the beat doesn't even drop until like a minute out or something like that.
Mhm.
It's just building this ambiance and this space, if you will.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, that's really cool. And do you mix and master like your own stuff, or?
I've been mixing on my own, but for mastering, I get it mastered externally.
Yeah.
Um, you know, I yeah, so I write the songs, I arrange the songs, I sound design them, I mix them up myself. I also have a mentor here in the Bay Area, um, who has a studio in Oakland. So, when I get to the mixing stages, sometimes I'll go hang out in his studio because he's got it all like soundproofed and tuned to a certain way. So you can really test the low end. But yeah, I tend to do the mixing myself and the best I can. And then for mastering, I reach out to somebody else externally.
Okay.
Yeah. And these folks, I mean, I can tell you who they are too. So my mentor, he's Lenny Kaiser. He's actually very active in the Ableton producing circles here in the Bay Area. And he produces, bass music and house music. And the person that I got some of my last couple of tracks mastered from is a guy called Dietrich Schoneman, who was recommended to me by a friend of mine called Chris Manick, who produces electronic music and DJs. He's actually based in the LA area.
Mhm. That's awesome.
What about yourself?
Yeah. I in my previous album, I sort of mixed it myself. I did
Mhm.
sort of everything myself, and I used like Lander, which is like a mastering service to like master them,
Mhm.
because I didn't have like a lot of money, and it could be expensive to
Oh
like
yeah.
whole album, and I was like, I'll just do it myself. But I think now I I'm sort of like in between. I'm like, do I want to mix it myself, or do I want to have someone else mix it?
Hmm.
And in my production, I'm noticing like I'm getting better at mixing, like because I'm spending so much time in there, and I'll just naturally start mixing stuff. You just, without realizing it, you'll just naturally start adjusting stuff,
Yeah.
because it's part of the creative process. And like I didn't really understand that at first. I was like, oh, you just produce something and then you send it to someone else and they
Hmm.
mix it. But I feel like now it's like I'm naturally just starting to do it, like within my production. So I'm like, I guess I should just have it done myself, or like maybe have it someone else like minimally mix it, just the stuff that I miss, or like don't know
Yeah.
how to do. But I'm realizing that I'm naturally doing it. So and I want as much of my own skills to be in there.
Yeah.
I think it's unique to the artist, to the sound, how that goes. But yeah, I think I would still master it probably externally, because I don't know. I think it's like there's some benefit in handing someone something off so where they could look at it objectively. But on the other hand, it's like you also want to, preserve like your own style, like by doing it yourself. So I haven't made up my mind yet, but that's like what I'm thinking.
Yeah, man. Mastering is a whole like yeah, I don't even know where to begin there. Um, you said you're getting better at mixing as well. Like, are there any particular things that are helping you out? Like, are there sort of any, moments you've had where you're like, oh yeah, this, and now as a result, you've gotten better?
Yeah, well, I have a mentor who I work with. His name is Harley, and he
Mhm.
does mostly electronic music, but he's like very technical, and like he sort of helped me with different things with like EQs on different tracks, and like automation, and just where things should be in the mix, like just as far as like EQs, and like, okay, how do you do the chain so that it sounds right, and like how do you do like compression and stuff on like different things. So
Mm.
yeah, I've been doing a lot of that, and I guess I don't know if I have anything specific. It's just, I guess the one thing I've learned is like I'm a lot more particular about like my EQing now, where like I want stuff, because he's like I want stuff to be in like a certain place, like everything sort of I want to be in a certain place, where as before I would just sort of like just wing it, like the EQ. I was like, oh, this sounds cool. And, like I didn't really get like where things like should be and like we're supposed to be. But now I'm like sort of diving into that and like bussing, because that's like a big, part of like saving time and like and stuff like that. So I've just sort of been, it's like honestly a whole workflow. It's like, how do you bus everything? How do you put the chains on everything? How can you streamline all these things to like work together?
When you say, knowing the place for everything, do you mean like your instruments, like knowing where in the frequency spectrum you want them to sit?
Exactly.
Or
Yeah.
okay. Yeah, yeah. It's this is, I think with mixing, this is where like the uh unintuitively, or I didn't think this would be the case, but the piano playing has helped me get better at mixing.
Oh wow.
Because
How
if you
was that?
take like all of your instruments, right? So let's say, you had a piano with like whatever, 80, 90, 100 keys. And then if you imagine for each instrument, somebody sitting on that one piano and playing those keys, you can kind of start to see, oh, this person is overlapping with this other person now. Like this is where the, I don't know, like the person playing the rhythm is sitting. but now the person playing the lead is kind of clashing with them or with the bass. And so it helps you to kind of see those potential clashes, if you will, because you're like, oh yeah, these are all in the same place, or there's no way you can play, one over the other.
Yeah.
um so I've yeah, my first few tracks that I mixed were like very difficult, but mainly because of that, like a lot of instruments were sitting in the same spot. um but more recently I've started to go like, okay, like I'll lay down a bass line, maybe I have some harmony, some chords, and then I'm like, okay, I need a lead, I need a secondary melody. But now when I'm like making music, this is just during the creative process at the beginning, I'm a lot more intentional, I feel like, on where what I'm looking for.
Cool. And you learn that, like, I guess over time, just how
Yeah.
to start thinking about it before you're doing it.
Yeah, this happened actually. This hit me when I made the song called I Want You Now. And that song is a little bit, that's one of my songs that's that I put out in about a year ago. And it's very influenced by drum and bass, jungle, even some synthwave, really. And it started off actually as a sample challenge. So I was part of this electronic music community on Discord, started by an artist called Speaker Honey, where every couple of weeks people would have producer challenges, and there was this sort of secret sample challenge, if you will, where different people made little samples, and you know it got exchanged, and you had to make a track using it. So anyway, one of the guys on there, Crosstick, he had this really cool bass sample, or just like this gnarly, I don't even know if it was a bass, but it was some kind of synth sample. And I sampled it and made a bass line. And then I was trying to figure out what to do with the rest of the track. And so I had the bass line playing, and I was sitting on the keyboard and just like trying to work out what to do with this. Started to lay down some chords and with my left hand. And while I was doing that with the right hand, trying to figure out how I would, you know, sing a melody or write something like a solo on top of it. And so at that point, my left hand was playing the chords, the right hand's playing the melody. And then eventually, after a bunch of work, I figured out what I wanted to do. That's when it hit me. It was like, oh, wait, on the keyboard, these two things are sitting in totally different parts. Like they might be next to each other, but they're not clashing over each other. Whereas previously, what I would have done is I would have maybe written the chords, and then I would be like, okay, I have the chords now. Now I got to write a melody. So maybe I'll go into Ableton, I'll try to draw a melody or something like that. But I wouldn't really be thinking like, oh, this melody is in the same, range, if you will, as the chords are. I would just kind of draw it, and then I would be like, okay, maybe I should pitch it up or down, or mess around like that. So then I was like, oh, and in the mix it just worked. So I was like, oh, the reason this works is because they're not clashing. It was very simple, but um yeah,
Yeah.
that was one of those moments.
And do you use like are you using like a big full keyboard when you're producing, or do you just use like a smaller
And
one?
so I'm actually in my like, so where my studio in my house is at, in my room, I've got a MIDI keyboard, I've got a couple of synths around, and my actual piano, like it's a digital keyboard. It's like a 89 key, one of those. It's weighted. That's actually not in this room. That's in a different room. It's in my like living room. And so it's almost like I actually wanted initially to be in this room, but when I first moved into this place, um, just because there was a lot of boxes, I happened to put it there, and I just really like sitting there and playing because there's a window and it gets sunlight and stuff. So it's nice for piano practice. So I just left it there, but that is not connected to this setup at all. So what ends up happening is now my production process is like depending on how it starts. If I started on the computer with like samples or a beat or something, you know, then I'll kind of go to my keyboard and sit down there and just focus on what this song is about. Like, okay, what does the chord progression need to be? And then maybe I figure that out with the bass line and the chords. And then, I'll record it on my computer. I'll come back and do that. And then I will have to think of a melody. Sometimes that will take a while to work out.
Yeah.
But that's when I can just sit on that keyboard and play it out. I have the chords and then I'm like singing it, trying different ideas. Um, and it seems like maybe it's too many steps involved because I have to keep going back and forth. And this doesn't happen, by the way, in one session. This is like I'm talking over a matter of days. But I feel like just sitting there and working out that song on the keyboard, uh, it makes it so that some of the distractions from the computer are not there. Like I'm not worrying about, clicking around, moving this thing out of the way, coloring these tracks, and trying to turn off all the notifications, people texting me, like, I
Yeah,
can just sort of sit down and focus on the song. Like, what is this?
it's true. Yeah. Yeah, I feel that sometimes I feel like I'm way too involved in the computer and I should like just use my keyboard like separate because I have sort of like you, I have like a separate one.
Yeah.
I have like this little like Arturia mini lab.
Hmm.
So I really want to get outside of using the computer, but I feel like I'm so used to like doing everything in the computer that it's like almost it's just like more comfortable because I'm like, oh, what if I forget?
Oh yeah.
If I miss something, you know? But that's like something to think about.
Yeah, dude, I've been going through this journey. I'm actually getting rid of some of my synths one by one, selling them off. Like a few years back, I just had like, I don't know what it was, like synth FOMO or something. Like whenever, Black Friday sales would come around and I'd follow some crazy deal, I would like try to buy a synth. But, having too many of these started to make me like, I wasn't mastering any of them. I was doing a little bit of everything.
Mhm.
And also it was making it like, I don't know, it was making me feel like, hey, I'm not taking advantage of these enough, like, which would in turn cause me to play around with them, which in turn causes me to make fewer tracks. And so basically the conclusion I reached was just buying a lot more synths is not getting me to finish more tracks.
Yeah.
So I've been going through this thing where one by one I've gotten rid of a couple of these, selling them and whatnot. And I probably will sell another one as well, uh, just so I can, focus on getting my producing and songwriting chops solid before I add another instrument.
Yeah. I think that's like a trap that like everyone could fall into is like the materialism trap with music or like, okay, I want to buy like all these plugins or like I want to buy all these instruments because it's fun, it's like fun to mess around with them, but it's like it's also like a distraction too.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Oh man, plugins are especially notorious because they're always, you can't avoid them, They're all over social media. You get those ads, you get those emails.
Mhm.
You're like, so sometimes I'll ping my mentor and be like, "Hey, have you bought this plugin?" And he just replies like, "No, don't do it."
Good, but you don't have to like, waste your time or like waste your money on it.
Yeah, yeah. For your music, do you see yourself in, maybe I should frame this question differently. I'm curious, like, do you see yourself more as a producer or also do you see yourself as a performer?
I think I want to get to being a performer. That's like sort of what I see myself as.
Hmm.
But I feel like I sort of have to be a producer to like build a base to like do that, you know?
Like
And
build a base in terms of people who are into your music, or like a base of material like music?
Sort of both, I think, and especially with the pandemic and with because I have, I work full time too.
Mm,
And it's hard for me to just, go out and perform, so I just naturally have been producing a lot, which
yeah,
is fine. But like I hope someday I could transition to being more of like a performer. That's
got
like
it.
what I really want to do. But I also feel like producing is like good at this point because it like maybe I can achieve, a sound from it that's my own and that I'm constantly growing. So that is fun to watch myself like just make stuff that's more aligned with me,
Hmm.
like just as my skills improve. But I guess I see myself as sort of both, I think even if I couldn't imagine myself like just performing and just not producing at all, I feel
Got
like
it.
I'll always sort of want to test stuff out behind the scenes and like produce and be a recording artist. Um, I sort of want to perform like when there's I guess like if there's like a demand or an opportunity for me to perform,
Mm,
like I don't see myself just doing it like right now, I guess, because I feel like it's like I want to take my time and like make stuff, at my house, like make stuff here that like I really want to perform first. So
got it. Got it. Yeah, yeah. It's and if you were to perform, would it be like as a solo artist or with a band or?
I don't know. I think I would want to probably perform like either as a solo artist or with a band, but or maybe if I have a feature or something. But right now, I'd probably start just by myself, just because that's sort of how I've been doing everything.
Yeah,
I'd probably start that way and then see if anyone was interested in like collabing or doing something together. So
gotcha, gotcha. Yeah, someday I hope I'll be able to perform live as well. I with electronic music especially, um I want to be able to like solo using a synth. And so, because that's something I don't think you see a lot of in electronic music these days. You used to have a lot of it back in the 70s and 80s. People soloing, on the guitar, on the synth, on the keyboard, all over the place, saxophones. And so I want to have some of that element to my music where it's almost improvisational to some extent, because I think that could be really fun. But yeah, that's, you know, one step at a time, I guess, like trying to get there.
yeah,
But in terms of improving my skills as a performer, and also, as you said, like building a body of work that you can, work off of.
hmm for sure. Yeah. Would you um collaborate with other artists as well?
Yeah, I think collaboration could be fun. I haven't done much of it actually. I've mostly been solo producing. Um, but I think it could be fun to collab um, with other producers or even with other, you know, singers, vocalists, or other instrument players, even, you
Yeah.
know. Um, yeah, I just haven't done much of it. Have you?
I've not too much of it either. I've done, we I had a friend named Cloud who's a rapper who back when I used to live in San Francisco about like 2 or 3 years ago, he was on one of my songs and like we did some songs together.
Mm,
Um they didn't really most of them like didn't get released. There's just one song, Devil Eyes, that has him on it that we're both on.
mm,
Um and that was fun. We sort of had differences in like I guess just like what we wanted to do, like our sound. We just have like different inspiration. So we didn't do like too much, but we had fun for like a certain amount of time, just like,
Got it.
collaborating. But I would love to have in the future, like I'd love to have like, a feature on my
Yeah.
song. I'd love to, be on someone else's. Like I just think it'd be fun just to collaboration, you know.
Yeah, it's like I guess during collaboration, I haven't done much of it, but it would seem that, to collaborate successfully, either um you both have a common goal where you're like, okay, we're trying to make this, maybe you're both working the same genre, so it's kind of like easy to work with each other, which is one way. Or it's the other way, which is you're doing totally different things, and the purpose of you coming together is to make some crazy new stuff.
Yeah.
um like someone who's maybe making, like, I don't know, like playing jazz piano comes together with like a dubstep producer or something.
That'd be cool. Yeah.
Stuff like that. um yeah, you mentioned you also work a day job, and I'm curious, how you create time for your music.
Yeah, I would say it's mostly like on the weekends. Like
Mm,
I'll produce a lot, and then usually in the evening, like after I get home,
yeah,
I'll eat dinner, and then I'll do, like an hour or two, like a night. Sometimes I don't, but like that's typically when I do it, just on the evenings. And then, you know, sometimes if I feel like it'll like do it in the morning too. Um, but yeah, it is definitely a challenge because sometimes I'm like, oh, if I had more time, I would be able to put stuff out faster. Um, but it's okay. Like I just do like I guess what I can.
the got it. Yeah, that's a lot of, it takes a lot of dedication. um and I'm curious, if any of your work inspires your music as well.
It's funny you say that because it I don't think my work really inspires my music. Like, but I will say like sometimes I work in retail, so like the music at my work like somewhat inspires my music. Like the tracks that they play in my store
Got it.
playing so much that they're in my head a lot. So it'll like go into
Mhm.
it's really weird. Like it'll like go into my music just because I'm listening to it. And it's like pretty good music generally. Like they'll play like sort of like 80s rock music, different hits. Like it's actually a pretty good playlist that they have. I work in like a luxury watch boutique, so it's pretty fancy. Like they have like good music in there.
Mm.
Um, so I guess in that way it influences it. So
Dude, I gotta
yeah,
like, yeah. And do you have control over this music, or it's like already selected?
I don't, unfortunately.
Got it, got it.
Um,
Man, some places have really good music. um One of the places, I've sometimes I'll go to a Chipotle just for the music.
I've
Like, have you been?
never paid attention to it. I know that there's music on, but I never like register.
Because so there's a movie theater close by, right? Like I can walk to it in like 30 minutes. And just outside that place, there's a Chipotle. And so sometimes, I mean, I'll get Chipotle because, sure, I want something quick on the way. But sometimes, I'll go there and I'll just sit there because it's like the music is freaking good. Like, I don't know who is selecting this stuff. Like, I'll discover music that I haven't heard before. Like,
Oh wow, like
yeah,
Shazam.
yeah, and I'll be Shazamming in there. Like, I once tweeted at them too. I was like, "Hey, who is selecting the music for this branch here? I want this one song."
Yeah, that's awesome.
Um,
Yeah, I wonder like who is doing it.
but it's interesting also how much of a difference the music makes to the space, like the experience. Whether you're going to a store, a restaurant, what have you.
Mhm.
Um, Yeah. I end up, mostly making music, yeah, outside of my day job, like as you said, like in the evenings during weekdays and on the weekends. And every now and then when I'm able to, I'll try to take a day off. Like if there's a long weekend, I'll
Hmm.
try to attach a day or two to it so I can get some extra time for music. So
Yeah, definitely. It's important to have like time, like creativity. Almost, I think like creativity, there's an aspect of creativity in leisure that go
mm,
hand in hand, you know, like having, just having that space to like think for your mind
yeah.
to just create stuff. And that's how it is for me. Like it comes from a place of like, okay, if I empty my mind, then I'm like more creative. That's just
Mm,
like how I've been. So I try to get myself in that state. And like sometimes like I'll try purposely not to listen to music for a
mm,
while, like before I'm gonna write something, because it makes me generate, my own ideas.
yeah.
Yeah.
And what do you do for it? Do you like meditate? Do you take a walk?
I I I would say I take a walk a lot. Like, I live in a like my neighborhood's pretty good for that. So I'll like take a walk a lot, and then I'll read a book,
Mm,
you know, and sometimes that'll just help me like wind down, or like maybe I'll think of like, the story, and it will inspire me to like write, lyrics or something like that. Like that helps too. Also, like going out with my friends help. Just like having experiences can help you gain gain something,
oh
um,
yeah.
like in the real world.
I would find sometimes often that right after watching a movie that I would start getting ideas.
Oh,
It's the strangest thing. Yeah. Like, um, especially if I go to like a movie theater or something, or, I'll watch something and then on the way back, I'll just be like humming melodies or something and
mhm.
can't wait to get home because I want to like record it down. So it's interesting how that works. Um, for yourself, also, by the way, I had one more question. It was, you know, at any given time, do you work on a single piece of work or are you working multiple projects?
Yeah, that's a good question. I'd say more often I work on multiple projects, but
Mm,
then my goal is to do that until I find one that is like, okay, this is the one, and then I'll try my best to finish that one.
got it.
And then then once that's sort of done, I'll start again. Or if I get stuck, like maybe that'll happen, but I will get stuck. I'll sort of start working on new ones again.
I
But I
see.
always have one, I try to end up with one that I'm like, okay, this is the one I want to finish. And it's okay if I don't finish the other ones, but I have one that's like, okay, this is the main one that I'm working on. And
Got
then
it.
I'll, you know, unless I don't get stuck, I'll keep working on it. So
So you kind of go through like phases where you're like, at one time you have a ton of ideas, then you pick one and then you narrow down and then you do it again.
exactly.
Got it. Got it.
How about you?
Super cool. Man, my, yeah, I think I try to have like a couple of tracks that I'm working, maybe two or three at one time, so that I can keep things interesting, have a bit of perspective. So I might work on one, continue making progress, and then if I want to change, I always flip to the other one. Because I found that when I just try to work on one, sometimes I'll start to lose perspective where it's like you get too involved in some minor details of the tracks, which maybe don't matter at the end.
Yeah.
Um, but so that's what I try to do. And of let's say I'm working on two or three tracks at a time, one of them will emerge as like, okay, this is almost ready to be done. I need to finish up the mix, tighten it up, get it out. So then I might, start focusing on that. Maybe I'll do that for like a week or two. But I try to have like a couple of tracks that I'm working at a time so I can bounce between them.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's like yeah, and sometimes some of the tracks I've just abandoned, to be honest, because um I think more recently I've gotten a lot more clear on what I want to get out of a track, or what I think it should be.
Mhm.
Earlier on when I was producing, I was doing a lot of trial and error. I didn't quite know what I was doing, to be honest. So I would put things together, things would, but then, I might have like, I don't know, I might put a bass line, drums, some harmony, and then I wouldn't know what to do with the melody. Or I would, do all of those things, but then I wouldn't know what to do with the harmony or whatever, like whichever way. But these days I'm kind of more like, okay, this is the vibe. Is it, is this thing I'm adding contributing to this end goal? And if so, that's what I will do. Otherwise, I won't do it. And for some of these tracks, I might reach a place where I'm like, I don't exactly know what direction to take it. In which case, I'll, just put it in my sort of ideas folder and have it sit there until I figure out what to do with it.
Mhm.
Um, yeah.
Yeah, for sure. And yeah, I feel that. I feel that. And sometimes like I was watching a YouTube video. There's a producer called Andrew Huang on YouTube,
Oh yeah.
and he has some really cool, ideas and like videos. And like one thing that he said stuck with me, and he's like, you should. I think it was him that said this. He's like, you should like make a track like not to finish it, but just make some tracks like just or some projects like just for like the purpose of like sound design or like discovery.
Yeah.
And that has been really helpful, just to be like, okay, I don't have to like try to make this, a song. Like I could just do whatever I want. Like this is a free project. I can just test as many things and do as many things. And sometimes like those have been really cool, like just doing that and like just letting go of like the expectations.
Yeah, because that takes away a lot of the pressure as well. Like
Yeah.
you're not suddenly like, beating yourself up for being like, oh, I gotta finish this. It's not happening, or what. It's, you got what you needed to get out of it, whether it's you learned some how to do something, whether it's, you know, you put a combination of ideas together and try to see if they would work or not. So you've got something you've learned from it.
Mhm. Yeah, it's like I remember when I started producing, like everything was like that. Like
Mm.
everything was just I was just discovering. And then it's like almost like I forgot that I could do that. You know, I was like, okay, everything has to be like a song. And like I just stopped trying to do that. But it's still important, I guess, to do that. So.
Yeah, yeah, for sure.
All right. Well, I think we're gonna wrap up soon. Do you have anything else you wanted to say, or did you want to let people know, like, when I guess like your releases or when anything's coming out or where they can find you on the internet or anything like that?
Yeah, yeah. Thanks for that. Yeah, so again, I go by the artist name Dislokated with a K. And, you can find my music on Spotify, Apple Music, SoundCloud, Audius, and I'm also on Instagram. I have a new track out called Luminosity that came out a little around 2 weeks ago. And yeah, I'd love for folks to check it out. Hit me up, let me know how you like it. And the artwork, by the way, I wanted to give a shout out to one of the artists here in the Bay Area who's helped me with that artwork and some of the previous things as well. It's a guy called Jonathan Fetzer, who goes by Fetz Audio Visual, and he's someone who's really active in the electronic music scene here, doing visuals for DJs and things like that. And so, yeah, that's the artwork that you see on the cover of this album as well.
Nice.
So
Cool.
yeah, I appreciate you having me, Ron. Is it's good to talk music and also get some, exchange some tips on the producing side.
Yeah, it was awesome. Yeah. All right. Well, thank you everyone for tuning in, and we'll see you guys next time.